Who was actually the worst president ever? The president of the Selena fan club. Selena was a popular Mexican-American singer in the late 80s early 90s. The president of her fan club shot and killed her after being confronted about embezzling money. Fuck Yolanda Saldívar. Yolanda is safer in solitary than she'd be out here. There's no way she'd be safe in Gen Pop either. The hate is still strong, even generations later. I saw Yolanda Piñata the other day, clearly meant for a kid's birthday. I have a close friend who's a nurse in Gatesville, where Yolanda is incarcerated. She tells me that she is heavily protected whenever she leaves her cell and has been in protective custody ever since. She has absolutely no clue that Selena is more famous now than she ever was. Once she is paroled, I'll honestly give Yolanda a month before she is found dead. I'm in Texas. There are zillions of Selena fans here. That bitch Yolanda. Oof. Rip Selena. That shit was depressing AF when it happened. South Texas anger is real and so very strong for her. Everyone has a Selena story or knows where they were when she died. Texas is such a divided state, but there is literally only one thing all Texans can agree on. Yolanda is trash. The movie based on that story is honestly one of the best based on a true story movies I've ever seen, and I'm 100% guaranteed to cry at the end if I watch it again. Yolanda is the Latina Karen. This is the most true answer. Yeah ooh Yolanda. First comment I see: Jesus H Christ, you decided to set the bar high AF, huh? Shout out to all the fans waiting outside Yolanda's prison unit for when she gets parole. You are right. This is the worst president. Eligible for parole in 3 years. SMH. Pol Pot. He sure was the worst of the worst. My parents experienced the genocide firsthand. He was a terrible, terrible person. It's a holiday in Cambodia, where people dress in black. I don't have much knowledge of Southeast Asian history, but to my understanding he was killing all the smart people and killing people with glasses? What the fuck? Most evil man. I watched the first They Killed My Father movie with my BF's mom, who is Cambodian, boat PPL, and escaped the regime through Vietnam/Thailand. She was like, oh yeah, it was like that. But much worse. It really hit home when visiting Cambodia and realizing that there is an entire age demographic almost completely missing from society. The further realization that the few people you do see in that demographic were likely part of his regime is gut-wrenching. The country and its people are beautiful and kind, but the fallout is overwhelmingly tragic. A palpable pall of sadness still lingers over everything. Been to Cambodia a few times and talked to some survivors. This is the correct answer. I know people hate US presidents, but it's nothing compared to what happened in Cambodia. You won't falsely implicate your family? You're not worth a bullet in the head. We'll beat you to death with car axles. And we'll do it so much teeth come out of the ground when it rains. Absolutely horrific. Mobutu Sese Seko, president of Zaire, aka Democratic Republic of the Congo, by far is the worst president. After deposing and executing the former president Patrice Lumumba, he then went to turn the country to an insanely corrupt autocracy, gutting the natural wealth of the country as well as its institutions to enrich himself to the tune of up to $15 billion. The man had the country build him an airstrip in the middle of the jungle near a palatial estate known as the Versailles of the jungle, so that he can charter a Concorde to take him to go shopping in Paris. There were uncountable human rights violations and massacres attributed to him during his rule. His support for the Hutu extremists after the Rwandan genocide directly led to the First and Second Congo Wars, which attributed to the deaths of some 6 million people. Yeah, American presidents don't come close to how terrible this guy was. Fun fact, any country that gets renamed to include Democratic or People's Republic is neither of those things. After deposing and executing the former president Patrice Lumumba, with the help and backing of Belgian intelligence and the CIA, should mention that his seizure of power was only possible because of massive Western support, who helped him because they were scared of communism. Don't omit the fact that the entire scheme against Lumumba was organized by the CIA and Belgian secret security forces. This isn't a conspiracy theory. The CIA is loud and proud about it. And the field agents who orchestrated the whole murder gave lots of interviews about their role. Former President Patrice Lumumba. Prime Minister, not President. Ferdinand Marcos, basically starved our nation. And the damn people still elected his son to be the current president. And probs every single president in the PH. Edit, yeah. Filipinos aren't the best at electing leaders. Lamau. I'm supposed to type Marcos, but I'm glad someone has the same idea as I do. Dude fucked our country with debt that people are still gonna pay till 2025? And here comes the Marcos Jr. gonna make sure Filipinos will pay for his parties and vacations for generations. I have Filipino friends who defend this guy, the son, and claim that many of the stories around his father, Ferdinand, are fabricated. I don't know a whole lot about your country's history, but it baffles me that there are first-hand accounts of what happened during his presidency and yet my friends deny it. It's worth noting that the U.S. lobbying firm advocating for Ferdinand Marcos in Washington was run by Paul Manafort and Roger Stone, Trump's former campaign manager and political advisor, respectively, both of whom he pardoned for crimes before leaving office. Manafort and Stone's lobbying firm was dubbed the Torturer's Lobby, and worked on behalf of a lot of the war criminals in this thread, working hard to convince lawmakers to overlook their clients' atrocities. Manafort, of course, later worked for pro-Putin stooge Viktor Yanukovych's campaign to be elected as head of Ukraine. When Yanukovych fled to Russia rather than face treason charges, Manafort found a new political client, Donald J. Trump, his old friend and neighbor. His wife ended up retiring in Honolulu, being chauffeured around in her old Mercedes accompanied by a motorcycle police escort. They were third-world grifters to the bitter end. Didn't his wife spend millions on shoes? Assuming president just means leader of a country, not counting Hitler, easily Pol Pot. Just supremely evil, and his actions go under the radar because it happened in country the West rarely thinks about. Pol Pot holds the WR speedrun for dropping average life expectancy to under 20 years old. And heaven forbid you wear glasses. Pol Pot might be worse than Hitler tbh, but I suppose we shouldn't make it a competition. I went to Cambodia and did a historical tour of the killing fields. Felt so ignorant for not knowing about Pol Pot or what happened to the Cambodian people. I'm 31, born and educated in the United States. If president in this case just means leader of a country, surely Leopold II of Belgium and the Congo Free State takes the cake with his estimated 22 million body count. My father-in-law, every living family member, and friend was arrested and tortured under Pol Pot. He and some of his family survived because he pretended he couldn't read. They would have killed them all otherwise. After being tortured for untold amounts of time, a new guard ended up recognizing one of the family members and somehow got them released. Even after Pol Pot was removed from power, my wife's family had an underground shelter below the house to sleep in. There were air raids at night and planes would shoot their guns through any structures visible from firelight, as the country was in ruins and there was largely no electricity, save for major cities and settlements. Most of the men in the family are permanently crippled in some way due to the torture. My father-in-law can't sit up without a back brace for long periods of time. His brother-in-law only has one eye. His brother has brain damage. They tied his hands behind his back and put a bag over his head and tied it shut. They thought he was dead, so they threw him in a pit, a mass grave. He woke up sometime later, with dead bodies over him, and somehow freed himself. Never recovered fully from the brain damage, lack of oxygen. There's a lot more, but I'm tired of typing these atrocities. The dead Kennedys would like to have a word with you. Hitler was president of Germany after Hindenburg's death. But yeah, Pol Pot is by far the worst president ever. Robert Mugabe, probably. A pretty good rundown. Report on CNN. Got a friend of mine who was shot as a kid when his family farm was seized by Mugabe followers. His mom, dad, sister and youngest brother were shot too and left for dead. His youngest brother, 3 at the time, did not survive. Harrowing story. Farm murders weren't uncommon under Mugabe's tenure. The fact that this man lived out his later years in great wealth and free from conviction due to diplomatic immunity is simply criminal. I lived through Jacob Zuma and I still say Mugabe is the winner. I miss the rains down in Africa. My folks lived there in the latest 80s early 90s, before he killed his agricultural sector. It's a true shame how badly he fucked up the country. Idi Amin. This article about a Ugandan Asian family's return to visit was worth a read. Can you feel it? This is Uganda. 50 years after fleeing Idi Amin, my family sees home on our own terms. My dad actually saw Idi Amin when he was on a trip to Saudi Arabia in the 80s. He said it was really surreal to see a dictator in person. Edit: if you hit a paywall, here's a similar article on CTV News. Worst king of Scotland ever approached the scene of the caper. Dude trashed my parents' house and took their shit. Which is pretty good compared to others, although it's the reason I'm Canadian now, so there is a plus. My geography teacher in the 80s, he was nearing retirement, had served in the British Army in Uganda, when it was a colonial protectorate of the UK. He knew Idi Amin, and indeed he was one of my teacher's subordinates. When we asked him what Amin was like, he replied, actually a half-decent NCO, but not really presidential material. I used to work with someone that had been invited to a dinner party that Amin hosted. She said he was the nicest man. I told her she was nuts. A lot of people would think Idi Amin butcher who murdered a lot of people in Uganda, but when you meet him there's a whole other side to his character. He's tremendously good at Connect 4. President Scroob. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? That's amazing. I've got the same combination on my luggage. Why didn't anyone tell him his ass was so big? I drop this line all the time and just get blank stares. So disappointing. Steve, senior high class president, class of 1992. You ran on a platform of getting porno mags in the school library. It's been 30 years, Steve. There are still no porno mags in the school library. Steve, I voted for you, dude. You had one job. One promise. Yeah, fuck you, Steve. I'm gonna tell C-SPAN to update their list. Steve Holt. Vote me for class president. I'm gonna put beer in the water fountains, and cameras in the girls' locker room. Let's go Bobcats. If it's been 30 years, you probably shouldn't be looking for porno mags in a school library. These fucking politicians. All promise, no follow through. They promise the moon, and then they fuck off with actually doing any of it. I'm sure today's teenagers would love to enjoy community-shared porno magazines from 30 years of school rotation. Sure, you can find this stuff online, but it's about being a man, and living up to your word. Sticky magazines that by now would resemble papier-mâché with naked women printed on them. A passage of rights for any teenager of the school. I say we force these filthy magazines into the hands of students, and then shove it in Steve's face that he can't get the job done. And if Steve has kids, Steve's kids will get some porno too. Just to remind Steve that every action has a reaction, and there are consequences for your actions. These pornos in Steve's home will represent his shortcomings as a man, and as a president. I vote impeachment on Steve, senior high class president of 1992. Maybe his mom threw away his best porno mags. You can't take these promises so literally. Steve meant like we should aspire to more readily accessible porn. I think he's achieved this and more. Ferdinand Marcos. What baffles me so much is, his fucking son got elected. People are definitely stupid. In the mid-90s, I knew a 40-something woman who had grown up in the Philippines. Periodically, and completely unprompted, she would talk about what it was like to grow up in that police state. Neighbors getting dragged away in the middle of the night, all sorts of things. That sort of instability has terrible effects on children. I think that she was working through childhood PTSD. Kind of frightening when you think that most of the kids in her neighborhood probably had that as well. It's a shock of how much shitty things that happened during his regime went under the radar for many citizens of the country. Propaganda is a powerful tool. Idi Amin was a real nasty prick. He never really got his comeuppance either. Lived in luxury to the end of his days. He tried to make a plea to return to Uganda one last time. While on his deathbed, they basically told him if he entered Uganda he would be swiftly executed for his crimes. I'd guess Pol Pot or Mugabe. I would put Pol Pot as worse than Mugabe. Mugabe was bad, but he didn't kill a quarter of the entire population in just 4 years in power. Yes, Zimbabwe is still feeling the effects of his time in power, but he just left a few years ago and his party still rules. The KR were in power for less than half a decade and their effects are still impacting Cambodia 40 years later. Mugabe may have crashed the economy, but at least there's not an entire fucking generation missing. The president of my HOA. I hate that bitch too, and I don't even know them. My dad is the president of his HOA and has told me about times he's had to knock on people's doors because their lawn needed to be mowed. He can't understand why some of his neighbors don't like him. I went to my first HOA meeting for the house we bought, and the very first thing the chairman of the board of directors, said was, the primary purpose for the HOA is to maintain and grow the value of the members' properties. Absolutely everything was filtered through that. The president of any HOA. John Tyler is rarely mentioned, but he gets my vote. I'm reading his biography right now. He is the only U.S. president who renounced his American citizenship after leaving office in order to join a nation making war on the United States. He literally committed treason after leaving office. Don't let his grandsons hear you say that. He's a descendant of Wat Tyler, leader of the peasant revolt in England. Quite opposite characters. Wow. Just, wow. I know almost nothing about this guy, and now I can't wait to wiki him later. Renounced his American citizenship, he literally committed treason after leaving office. In the US it's only treason if you're a citizen. Why, Johnny Tyler? You mad cat, where are you going with that shotgun? Sorts by controversial. ETA, I'm gonna stick to American presidents because that's where my strongest understanding of history is. But I'd go with James Buchanan. He was the guy before Lincoln while tensions between states were increasing rapidly, and instead of actually doing anything he just kinda let everything boil over. I think you can also make a good argument for Andrew Johnson. His ridiculous Reconstruction Plan highly contributed to Jim Crow and the worst of segregation. He was a widely disliked person and avoided conviction after being impeached by a single vote. Yep, that's the US answer, full stop. Hey James, the states might break out in civil war. Yep, they sure are. Shouldn't we do something about that? Didn't think about that. Nah though. Philip meant US president, and all answers that I've seen have been from other countries. The two controversial answers are from short-memory sensationalists. Buchanan is the right answer. His refusal to do anything to avoid the Civil War led to the greatest threat the Union has ever faced and left more Americans dead than every 20th century conflict combined. Anytime you hear an American going on about Trump being the worst president ever, or Obama, or Bush, they're simultaneously revealing their political preference and telling you they don't know that much U.S. history. I 100% agree with this. We had bad presidents before, we have corrupt presidents, we've had presidents that waffled every decision. Buchanan was a weak president during a time America needed a strong leader. He tried to be a man of both sides when we needed a leader who took decisive actions. He had a bad situation and only made it significantly worse by enacting weak middle-of-the-road legislation which led to America being in a worse position during the start of the Civil War and pretty much guaranteed a civil war was inevitable. I think a strong argument can be made for James Buchanan. He literally let the United States fall apart on his watch and took no action. By some accounts he even shipped arms supplies south so the rebels could seize them. By all accounts it was too late for him to do anything anyways. He was basically elected to be a martyr for the catalyst of the Civil War. Going by other comments, I'd say Pol Pot was definitely worse than that. Gianni Infantino, president of FIFA. Today I feel gay. Sepp Blatter would like to have a word with you. Infantino was supposed to cleanse FIFA of corruption and became responsible for an even bigger shit show. This one has to be a joke, right? No shot you're comparing Infantino to these walking demons. Today, we are Qatari. Great Thanksgiving conversation starters. Yolanda Saldivar. She was the president of Selena Quintanilla's fan club. She murdered Selena Quintanilla in 1995. Andrew Johnson. Torpedoed Reconstruction and firmly entrenched civil rights issue in a prebellum era. We are still fighting our way out of that. At least Buchanan was only pitifully weak. Johnson was actively determined to ruin shit. Antebellum is usually the term used to describe the time before the Civil War, just for your information. The guy before O.J. Abraham Lincoln. James Buchanan. You can basically blame him for the Civil War. How did O.J. get into this discussion? And the guy right after. Andrew Johnson basically undid a bunch of the work Lincoln started and we are still dealing with the impacts. Dude definitely sucked, maybe even the worst president, but a civil war over slavery was probably inevitable from the founding of the U.S. I think several of the founding fathers wrote that they were pretty sure it was going to be the end of the republic when the bill came due. As bad as he was, civil war was happening anyway and was a culmination of all the actions from presidents before him. Had he prevented the Civil War it would have been a miracle. It's historically ignorant to blame it all on him. I figure it's a toss-up between Buchanan and Johnson, who came right after Lincoln. My college drama club president, dude was in charge of a pizza party and he messed it up bad. We all ended up only getting one slice each. The president of drama club creates drama so rich that people still talk about his pizza party years later. Shocking. At my last job, when I got there we had this worthless manager we all hated who was useless, except for the fact that he was a fat guy who loves to eat. So when the company bought pizza, he would order like 15 to 20 large pizzas for the, roughly, 35 of us. He was replaced by another manager who we all loved and was spectacular at her job, however she ate like a bird. When we went for Chinese, she would have an egg roll and that would be her entire lunch. So when the company bought pizza under her, she would order 2 pizzas for 35 people because she didn't think anyone would want more than one slice. Overall, she was great and I'd take her over the other guy every time. But the pizza situation was fucked. Jazz hands my ass. The real answer. Yo, fuck that guy, I'm heated RN. Let me tell you about Jacob Zuma. Go ahead dude. If you ever hear any government or organization say we are investigating ourselves over allegations misconduct/corruption, expect that everything that follows will be complete lies. They only investigate themselves because any external investigation wouldn't yield the outcome they want. The findings of those internal investigations were decided before they began. Probably Andrew Johnson. Dude fucked up Reconstruction so bad we still feel the effects today. This is my vote. People maybe say Buchanan for allowing the Civil War to happen, but really it was going to happen at some point either way. A better president would have delayed it, not prevented it. Andrew Johnson fucked up Reconstruction so bad and led to so mucus racial discrimination and inequality, which is the fundamental cause of all the racial tension in the U.S. ever since. He didn't fuck up Reconstruction. If he had his way, Reconstruction wouldn't have happened in the first place. That's what makes his presidency so contextually heinous. The president of my cricket club embezzled funds for the end-of-year trip for their gambling habit. That's not cricket. Not a president, but King Leopold II of Belgium. This guy is arguably up there with Hitler and Pol Pot. I will spare the details. If you want the details read King Leopold's Ghost, really good book about the Belgian control of the Congo. With guys like Hitler and Mao, it can be said that they at least tried to improve their respective countries. Leopold was just pure profit and malice. Nixon committed treason in order to prolong the Vietnam War before he even got elected. Watergate is more well known but less of a crime, really. What makes Watergate so funny is that it was completely unnecessary. Nixon was bossing the election, and had Watergate not happened, he likely would be remembered as one of the better presidents of the post-war era. Watergate is a sideshow compared with COINTELPRO. The tangled ratfuck that is contemporary U.S. politics can be traced back to Nixon. The book Nixonland does an excellent job of detailing how, but TLDR, rather than rising above and trying to unite the American public in the wake of the civil rights movement, Nixon, through his Southern strategy, exploited racial grievances for political gain. Fun fact, under Nixon, the U.S. dropped 230,000 bombs over Cambodia. That statement was released by the USAF a couple years ago. They were a neutral country. Not many people know about the Khmer Rouge, but the Cambodians basically had their own Holocaust. Nixon was so twisted he needed 4 men to help him screw his trousers on in the morning. Classic line. The country runs better with a better-looking man in the White House. Look at Nixon. No one wanted to fuck him, so he fucked everyone. Samantha Jones, Sex and the City. Warren Harding. He probably would have been the first U.S. president to do jail time, but he died in office. Edit, grammar or typos. Teapot Dome. But boy, could he regulate. His scandals were relatively small potatoes related to how they affected the direction of the country. He was a corrupt guy but not particularly significant. Reagan was pretty shit. He can be blamed for most of economic worries we've been facing due to his greedy trickle-down economics scam. I'm not a fan of Reagan, but there's definitely a good amount of presidents far worse than him. Reagan was directly responsible for unraveling the fairness doctrine and allowing media consolidation. This created the hyper-polarized political environment we're in and is the main reason why nothing gets done by government anymore. That man broke America and we're only now seeing how badly. Can't believe how far I had to scroll for this. That man set America's demise in motion. Actually, I can't believe an American president is this far up, considering he's contending against people committing literal genocide.
What is your answer? Thanks for watching.